we will move on to our session one, panel one. And this topic will be talking about the energy futures, driving the future by leveraging renewable and sustainable energies in Africa. And we look at Egypt's success story. For this, we have lead speaker Antoine Wagner-Jones, once again, from Bloomberg NEF, who just spoke. And as moderator, we will have Dr. Samer Atalla, Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research from AUC School of Business. And we have 4 panelists in this session. Mrs. Lamia Yusuf, Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy. We have Mr. Khaled El Degwai, Concessions Director, Orascom Construction. We have Mr. Ahmed Zaran, CEO and co-founder, Calm Solar. And Mr. Christos Argirio, Executive Director from Kala Holdings. Now I would like to pass this on to the moderator. Over to you, Samir.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Antoine, for giving a very good, detailed picture of renewable energy in Africa and what are the key determinants for growing it, whether it's international financing or local financing or institutions. I believe you have already a presentation on Egypt, so over to you.
Thanks, Samir. I'll be very quick, given that I've just spoken as well. But just to introduce this panel, and I'll try and get it over to our panelists and to back to Samir as quickly as possible. I'll just give a bit of context. So without going back into the cost story that we've just presented, it's also worth noting that this is something that we're seeing particularly as of relevance to the MENA region, so North Africa in particular, given the fact that there is access to low-cost gas in particular. So this is showing the cost of different energy sources. And on the left-hand side, we see the cost of new build renewables against new build fossil fuel generation and its past cost and also forecast. And we see that over the years to come, when you're considering building new capacity, then renewables will be far more competitive than building coal and far more competitive than building new gas plants. And that's of particular relevance to Egypt because back in 2014, costs for renewables were much higher. The government decided to embark on launching the renewables program, which took a lot longer, which took a good few years to get going before it did with great success, but also commission large volumes of gas. So 14 plus gigawatts of gas were added with the Siemens gas plants that came online. But if that situation were reached today, the picture would be very different. But it's also still relevant because there are questions around potentially building a coal plant. Again, the case for building new renewables against fossil fuel generators, it gets stronger by the day with the cost declines that we referred to earlier. And on the right-hand side, this is the cost of actually producing new renewables against the cost of existing fossil generation. And again, over the years to come, we see where coal plants, if already built, might remain competitive for a long time. Renewables do outcompete gas over the sort of mid-term by mid-decade. So that's just for context, and this applies to Egypt. And what also applies to Egypt is the fact that when we do our bottom-up LCOE analysis and we look at different markets, we see that solar is the cheapest source of new bulk generation today. So that's key, and that's why we're starting to see investment ramp up. And what's interesting is that this really compares to other markets where that still isn't the case. Algeria is one of them, where access to cheap gas and more expensive financing costs means that gas remains competitive. And that's even not the case in markets that are still seen as getting quite mature renewables markets, such as Japan and South Korea, where land constraints mean that renewables are expensive and coal is actually the cheapest technology. So this isn't a given, but it is a global story, and Egypt is part of it. And Egypt is if you're building a new technology, solar is cheapest in Egypt. And what we've seen as a result of that is what was for a long time quite a dormant market awakening very suddenly. So in 2014, as we mentioned, there was the launch of the Renewables program, and it was very much a learning process. And the government worked very closely with developers and financiers to develop a framework. Initially, there were issues regarding currency risk, arbitration, and also setting the right tariff. And only one 64 megawatt project reached financial close from that first round of the feed-in tariff program that was launched back in 2014. However, the lessons from that initial experience were learned, were integrated, and phase two was another story. So phase two of the feed-in tariff program saw over 1.4 gigawatts awarded at Benban, which is a historically massive project. As we see here, it coming online, bringing installed solar capacity to around 1.5 gigawatts. And it was subdivided into different plots, which meant many different developers could get involved. Above 30 developers roughly managed to get access to 25-year tariffs. And already we're seeing recognition of the fact that this was a very successful project, with acquisitions of those plots of different projects within Benban already happening as developers recognize that Egypt is a high potential market and are starting to seek a foothold and a road to market through acquiring projects already at this early stage. So that's very promising. And as a whole, this initial large commissioning of this project, as well as providing jobs to over 3,000 Egyptians, has driven down the cost of PV systems in Egypt, has started to establish a local value chain, and it's a very high profile success that bodes well for attracting investment from abroad. This is a chart that we looked at before, and it shows that Egypt is still very much reliant on international finance providers. The EBRD played a very important role in Benban and financing and backing it. That's likely to remain the case in the future, but it's likely to decrease quite dramatically as we see further projects reach financial close, as there is quite a large pipeline of projects to come. Now, before this panel, I think the panel will mostly focus on lessons learned, reflecting on Egypt's success and seeing what lessons can be drawn for the rest of the continent. But there are also a few questions that are worth considering in the context of Egypt specifically. So one of them is the question of oversupply. Right now, there's a debate about whether the large reserve margin that exists in Egypt currently might reduce the impetus to invest in renewables. I think general consensus is that demand will continue to rise despite this blip as a result of the coronavirus crisis, but that largely oversupply will not be an issue in terms of long-term investments. There's also a question of what auction programs are to come. There's a large pipeline that's been identified by the National Renewables Agency, over 3 gigawatts of solar and wind, but still, and while we've seen capacity awarded as sort of tenders, so competitive tenders for single projects at Gulf of Suez, Com Ombo, Ras Gharib, as well as at Benban, we see, and these have all proceeded on schedule, we still need a time frame for a lot of these projects and visibility for investors in the years to come. There was also a net metering scheme initially launched in 2017. It's been improved. New rules came into force in May of this year, and that will offer new opportunities to CNI customers. And what will also be relevant to CNI customers is a private-to-private PPA framework, which again is in the works, and a robust framework is due over the coming months. And lastly, I think, how does the renewable story tie into the fact that coal might be built? There's a question of nuclear that still remains on the table, and gas generation and the role of gas going forwards in light of the gas discoveries off of Egypt's coast and the existing gas plants. So these are all questions. We probably won't get to all of them in this panel, but it's setting the scene for what is a very complex market in Egypt, but what's a very attractive and successful one at the same time. So I'll hand it back to you, Sama, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you so much. I mean, a very elaborate summary of where Egypt is at now when it comes to renewable energy and solar particularly, and all the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. And I'm very happy that you alluded to the success story of Benban, which I believe we have a clip that we want to show the audience that summarizes this success story. So if the organizer can run the YouTube clip, that would be great. Until we get the video on, maybe I can start by asking Antoine, you alluded to the pike that happens due to the project, and you said that it's foreign finance, international foreign financing, and you said that this kind of pie where most of the financing comes from international markets, and you alluded that can probably change. Can you give us insight? How do you see that changing in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, and Egypt's taken an interesting approach, especially in terms of breaking down the Benban project into smaller plots, which means that I'll just answer this very quickly, seeing as we have the video up. But breaking it down into smaller plots means that it increases opportunities for investors who are able to tolerate sort of reduced levels of risk. So that's a potential for future projects if it's carried out in the same way. But we've seen in markets like Morocco, for example, that having a proven series of investments in renewables, having that ramp up, can crowd in local finance, but that's a slow process. It's an iterative one, and it usually comes a few years after a project like Benban is commissioned. I think what's interesting is to look at organizations that are active in Egypt, for example, in supporting local banks, in training them, in sort of raising awareness. And I think that sort of low level, sort of really working with capital institutions, with financial institutions, and making sure they have the resources and understanding of renewables to be able to sort of start financing them is vital. And you can't just assume that just because renewables are economically attractive, it means that people are going to start financing them. So I think it's an iterative process, but it's one where we can expect a lot of progress over the years to come.
Thank you, Antoine. I don't know if you're ready with the YouTube clip and the presentation. Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I can share it now.
Is that fine?
Yep.
Benban is a huge project, and it is a complex project. At several points, it looked like mission impossible.
تم اختيار موقع بنبان كونها انها احسن منطقه في مصر ساطعه للشمس، وده افضل مكان يتم فيه عمل مشاريع الطاقه الشمسيه والمسطح الكبير بتاع الصحراء هنا في البلاد.
You are working in very harsh environment in Benban, in the middle of the desert, trying to build a million square meters of panels and importing components from across the world to the site under a very tight schedule.
This will be beneficial for both the environment, and at the same time, it will be a very good secured power supply at a very reasonable and reduced cost.
Its location is magic. It is in an area that needs employment opportunities. It also encourages foreign direct investment in Egypt. So this is a project that ticks all the boxes.
المجتمع في بنبان حس بالأثر الكبير للمشروع ده، وخاصة في الجزء الخاص بعدد الأعمال الكبير جدا اللي دخل المشروع، وكمان النمو الاقتصادي الواضح اللي حصل جوه قرية بنبان.
Well, 5 years ago, Benban was just an idea, and now it's a spectacular project, a landmark project. But for us, it's not just about the financing. Of course, it's important to us that we're proud to be the largest financier of it. We had to really become a partner with the Egyptian authorities to find a way to build a project together that's really sustainable for everyone involved.
lot of our brothers from African countries, they are approaching us. We actually ready to give them training, capacity building. I'm very proud that this project has been done in Egypt, and it took a very short time to install this large capacity.
Once Benban is finished, it will be the icon of renewable energy in Egypt.
Thank you, Antoine, for sharing the video clip. I mean, it's a 4 minutes of a really concise summary of a true success story of the Benban project. I want to start the panel by presenting a lot of the work that the School of Business does in collaboration with ReEnergy Africa as its partner for capacity building. So I'll go over a couple of slides quickly on what we do at the School of Business to support the capacity building when it comes to renewable energy. So I'll go very quickly. This is, again, as I said, this is a capacity building partnership with us at the School of Business at AUC. We do provide different programs that can cater to the sector of renewable energy. I'll go over them quickly with just to give you a quick idea and to get your interest. We do, for instance, mastering business skills for entrepreneurs, which is a 69 hours program that has a lot of the elements that are needed for young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who wants to engage in renewable energy, such as risk management, fostering innovation and digital transformation, and typically things related to finance. As we'll see today in the panel, this is something of importance, and we have a program starting up in the spring of next year. The other one is corporate governance and access to finance, another important issue with renewable energy, and this one is in collaboration with the IFC, the International Finance Corporation from the World Bank. It includes issues and topics related to corporate governance and funding and valuation for startups, and the target audience is typically entrepreneurs and senior positions in SMEs and startups. Lastly, we work with the Ministry of Electricity in Egypt, and we on a course related to renewable energy independent producers, and this is typically targeted towards policymakers, renewable energy investors, and entrepreneurs. And again, this is a content that we could, as was noted by the Minister of Electricity in Egypt, this is where we can support our partners in Africa in their capacity building. Also with our colleagues in the AUC School of Science and Engineering, we can provide capacity for the clean energy management software, which is a 30-hour course, and it's targeted towards professionals and decision makers in the energy sector. And this is a more of a technical a program designated to decision maker in the energy sector. So with that, again, I would like to reiterate our ability and position in the School of Business as a capacity building partner for a lot of the investors, policymakers, entrepreneurs across the board in the African continent, in this very growing and important sector in the continent. With that, I'm very happy to start the discussion in the panel, and our first speaker is actually from the government, and she can help us understand more how Egypt was able to position itself as a success story when it comes to solar energy and renewable energy. I'm very happy to introduce Ms. Lamia Youssef from the Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy. Ms. Lamia, the potential is out there, the opportunity is out there. Can you briefly tell us how Egypt made it so far in the past few years?
At first, let me thank you all for having me in this panel and this important event for Egypt. To remember the history of how things has gone in the last few years, it started all when the Egyptian strategy was announced to reach 20 by 2022, 20% of renewable energy. At that time, we had some sorry, we had a report from the World Bank showing the potential for wind projects using the Egyptian Atlas. At that time, we had the potential of introducing or generating 3 gigas from the area of Gulf of Suez by wind power. We studied how to evacuate this, and we have a long-term plan. It started with the first project, which is in operation now with the consortium ENGIE, Toyota, Orascom. That engineer Khaled will speak better than me in this issue. Then in September 2014, it was announced the cabinet decree for the Benban project with its tariff and all the details. And we received 187 applications. Thanks to the cooperation between our partners in the government, NAREA, EHC, the Ministry of Finance, the regulator. Also, we had a great cooperation with the lenders. At the beginning, the developers were not part of this dialogue. We had negotiated each and every tiny details in the PPA with the lenders, EBRD, IFC, Proparco, and we finally reached the bankable PPA that was tendered to the market. Then the saying we used to say at that time that we were eating while cooking. We needed some legal frameworks, some regulators. It's all appeared in time. Then we had the success of also, in addition to Benban project, we had the success of the first 250 wind private project. It was followed by other projects that we had direct order with the same terms and conditions with the first one according to the cabinet decree. This is a brief of what has been done through the past few years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lamia. I mean, it's good to pinpoint the importance of starting with a strategy, and I think we'll come back to that later on. Our next speaker in the panel is Mr. Khaled Al-Digwi. He's the concession director at Orascom Construction. You are representing a company that had major investments in the wind projects in association with a lot of foreign partners. You have provided a very competitive tariff at the time. What do you think are the driving force to see this opportunity as a viable investment?
Well, thank you, Dr. Samer, and thank you everyone for allowing me this opportunity to present this project that we're all proud of. As mentioned by Engineer Lamia, this was the first ever private wind development in Egypt. It was possible to happen. I mean, as Engineer Lamia just mentioned, there was already a strategy that was outlaid by the government to support wind and solar projects. There was proper documentation. There was land that was ready to be developed that had some initial very promising wind potential. So let's say all the proper conditions were there, were well laid out. So this was very attractive for us as a local partner to be able to use this proper setup, if I may say so, and through our contacts with potential foreign investors, also convince them to join forces with us and come to invest in Egypt. This was at a difficult time post the revolution we had here in 2011. And at the time also, let's say the credit rating of Egypt was not at its best. However, because of the drive of the government, and that was a very important factor, that when you see a potential off-taker who is willing to make things happen, willing to support the developers in every way possible to achieve, let's say, our common targets, this enabled us to put together an investor group, including Japanese and French. And we all know that Japanese investors, they take quite some time. They need to be very well convinced that the opportunity has potential and that all the elements of success are there. So we worked together. We were able to finance it in a relatively short time, taking into consideration all the development efforts associated with wind projects in terms of the wind resource assessment studies. The area of Ras Gharib has a unique situation in terms of it's one of two most important migration routes for birds. So we had to do a lot of environmental studies in order to ensure the protection of the different species that pass through the area through introducing several mechanisms to ensure the protection, whether it's painting, whether it's shutdown on demand, whether it's radar monitoring of the movement of the birds during the migratory season. So it was quite a challenge, but we managed actually to finish. The construction was supposed to take place over 2 years. We managed to finish nearly 4 months ahead of schedule, and we're now nearly 10 months into production. So we started production last November, and we're approaching now 1 year of production. And the success of this story is driving us to repeat it and to do further investments again with the same group and other groups, because when you have at least one successful implementation, this, let's say, paves the way for others to follow suit and others to feel that yes, there is potential there, and there is a good opportunity to succeed with further developments and further projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khaled. This is very insightful. And our next speaker is Mr. Ahmed Zahran, a graduate of AEC School of Business and one of the leading entrepreneurs in the solar energy in Egypt. He is the CEO and co-founder of Cairo Solar. Mr. Zahran, Cairo Solar is always perceived as a success story, but last time I heard you speak, you said there is more to be done. We're still not yet a success. What is it more that can be done?
So basically, the reason I don't define it as a success story is because it takes a lot of time to really define success. And in Egypt, we have this tendency to be happy and dance very quickly and celebrate sooner than the time, or giving up also sooner than the end of the fight. So that's why I'm very careful with the use of the expression. So I don't think it's a success yet, because there is still to come, and we're still facing a lot of challenges that we have to deal with, whether from the regulations, from the the financing, from the private sector setup, and so on.
Okay. Can you elaborate on the opportunities that you can see based on your experience so far with Cairo Solar?
Listen, we started in 2011, and that was even before the national strategy was announced in 2014. It was a very different world when we started. I'm an economist by training, so I look at the fundamentals of the country. So this is a country where the solar resource is quite exceptional. It's like very rich in the solar resource, where the cost of land is significantly less than in other places, where there is a huge demand on energy and there is a growth, an annual growth, let's put it maybe at around 10% in general on demand on electricity. So basically you're looking at something where if you find the formula for making use of that land and that resource to satisfy the buildup in energy demand and the growth in the population and the growth in the economy, you'll be able to capture something that makes sense. It's a question of what would be the economic setup that you should use, or the economic formula, the business model, and a question of how you're going to finance it and the costs that you can achieve. And I think that is a winning formula for Egypt that would enable it to become eventually an energy hub and a leader when it comes to renewable energy.
Thank you, Ahmed. I just want to also reiterate to all the participants, if you have any questions, please make use of the chat box to send your questions to the panelists. Lastly, in our panel, I'm very delighted also to invite Mr. Christos Arguero, who is the executive director of Qal'a Holdings, one of the leading investment banks in Egypt. And you've also had an experience with energy transformation in Egypt. Can you please tell us how does the role of Qal'a Holdings fit into the big picture of transforming energy in Egypt to renewable and clean energy?
Sure, Samir, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Christos Argyriou. I'm an executive director in Qal'a Holdings. And the story of Qal'a is interesting because we've been looking at the energy very seriously ever since the inception in 2004, 2005. So that was 15 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to be part of this experience where, you know, we as a company, we focused our investment thesis on investing in market inefficiencies, because we had seen how the subsidies in energy were creating a lot of inefficiencies across all industries, whether you're talking about refineries or power generation. So at the time when we were looking at these upgrades and conversion projects, I remember very well looking also at renewables and looking at solar and wind, and we were always saying, you know, it's a bit soon. And actually, I remember vividly that this was something of, you know, even before 10 years before even, or 15 years before, everyone was talking about, yeah, you know, the future is solar, the future is wind, but nothing is happening on this front. And it was obviously because it was too expensive, it was unreliable, and it was not bankable. And of course, in front of us in Egypt, we had a lot to do in terms of upgrades. So there's been decades of lack of investment in the energy field in Egypt, and we stepped in as a private sector to try to do upgrade projects. One of them is the Egyptian refining company, $4.3 billion project finance, non-recourse with no sovereign guarantees. We saw the opportunity where the government refinery was producing too much of fuel oil, which the fuel oil, from processing crude, it was producing too much of the fuel that was no longer needed. We needed at the time diesel in Egypt. So we invested in a project whereby we would convert that heavy fuel oil that was not in need into something that the government was importing. So basically an import substitution project. And we were able to do that at the time when we were looking at in 2007, 2008 to raise funds, because the financing institutions were very interested in the environmental benefits of this project. And this was one of the reasons why the banks were willing to support this project, because it was saving the government a lot of money. And the carbon emission, so basically this project, this $4.3 billion project in the oil industry, our presence was not only environmental friendly presence, we actually reduced the pollution in Egypt. We reduced 30% of SO2 emissions. We removed sulfur that was being consumed. So this is one aspect of what Kala has been doing, even though it's not in the renewables, but it is in the oil and gas, in the upgrade part. The other company we've been also investing in since the beginning was Taqa, a leading gas energy distributor of gas and electricity, renewables and oil products, of course. And over the past 15 years, we've reached 1.2 million customers who 1.2 million customers who converted consumption of LPGs from LPG into natural gas. Okay, LPG obviously at the time was heavily subsidized, more than I remember 90% subsidies at the time when we started looking at this. And of course, so these kind of investments, these kind of conversions have been aligning all the views of environmental benefits, sustainability goals, obviously good returns on investment, and assisting the government with the problem of the logistics of oil. Obviously, oil is not the most efficient oil. It's been much more efficient than coal. Obviously, if we look, what we've been looking at as human beings since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we've been always trying to replace coal by oil, and now and this has been a big struggle over the years, and now we have the chance to be witnessing over the past 10 years renewables are coming now into the picture. Obviously everyone has talked about it, but the reduction in the cost is a big factor. Also in 2014, 2015, a lot of changes happened globally. We had the Volkswagen scandal that proved that diesel is no longer the preferred fuel for cars and set the path for electric cars in the future, and making this a much more sound investment. We also had the United Nations Convention voting on the Sustainability Development Goals. Sustainability Development Goals for me is one of the best things that have happened, because you're setting clear targets and you're also having a global solution. So this is not only about energy or poverty. You're tackling things on a global scale that applies both on Europe and Africa and the whole world. And it basically empowers the future generations of the world to be able to continue to believe in sustainable energy, in sustainable development, and to leave the idea of just everything is about whatever is easily available. No, we're here to make sure that the environment is protected, the planet is protected, no poverty, and all of this. And education. I mean, when in education we start talking in the school. I mean, my daughter today was telling me we heard about developmental sustainable goals. The teacher was talking about that. These kids, when they're gonna grow up, they're gonna continue to want to pursue the future where we have zero fossil emissions, and that we have, and hopefully attain the target of 2050, where we're emitting zero carbon. We emit zero carbon emissions. So I think we're living in very exciting times. I think that Egypt has done a lot over the past 5 years. It has set its strategy. It has taken very good economic measures, deregulation, focus on the deregulation, focusing on devaluation, and allowing for an investment climate that allows for these amazing projects to happen.
Thank you, Christos. Thank you so much. A very positive note in your remarks. I think we have a few minutes for one round of questions, right, Stephanie?
Yes. And
Okay.
We've been actually saying, please, everyone, feel free to use the Q&A question box to put in your questions. Generally, as we are trying to make up from the time that we lost in the beginning, we will not be able to take as many questions, but let's take one or two now. And please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will also be answering some of them online.
Okay.
So if anyone has questions, then please.
So until we have questions, maybe I can start with a couple of questions for the moderators, for the panelists. I want to start with Mrs. Lamia from the Ministry of Electricity. A lot of the panelists have referred to the policies that the government of Egypt has taken, starting from the strategy, obviously, but related to the deregulation, liberalizing the energy prices and the flotation of the pound. Do you foresee that there are other policies that the government can undertake to expand the vast opportunities of the renewable energy in Egypt, especially related to foreign investment and to domestic investment?
The government already is working on the new strategy that was updated to reach 42% from the total generation at the year 2035. This is number one. Number two, we also are working on the private-to-private PPAs that are now part of the new tools in the market. I think also this maybe concerns the banking sector. That we need to encourage the Egyptian banks to share in financing the renewable energy projects.
Thank you, Mrs. Lamy.
Just I want to mention something that we had a great challenge that these area in Gulf of Suez are a high drift valley for bird migration, which was a big challenge, but we managed to have a partnership between ETC, NREA, EEA, and the developers in participation with the renewable energy for renewables and energy efficiency, that we manage to do a proactive program to avoid the death of the birds, in the same time not to lose much of the energy generated.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Khalid, Antoine in his early presentation alluded to the issue of oversupply. Are you worried about oversupply? Or do you think that there is in a growing economy that adds 2 million inhabitants every year and a robust economic growth, that should not be a problem?
It's actually a unique situation that we're in Egypt at this point in time, that we have oversupply. However, oversupply today should not be a problem. Egypt is trying to be an energy hub, export energy to neighboring countries, and also with the economic developments, we're seeing a pickup in demand, and so projects should continue. To be honest, yes, due to this situation of a bit of an oversupply in the market, we see investments in renewables and in conventional slowing down a bit. Some projects were pushed forward. I'm glad also to say that the coal project has been scrapped. This was supposed to be a huge coal project happening on the Red Sea, and this is scrapped. I hope that the nuclear will follow suit, but this is a bit more political, so I will not venture there. So yes, this caused a slowdown. However, we see now a renewed interest, especially with the competitive prices of renewables. Today, the production cost of renewables is lower than the most efficient gas production, natural gas generating plants. So to lower the let's say the average cost of production in Egypt, I think as Engineer Lamia just mentioned, that even the revised strategy now is to reach 45% of renewables. So we have, let's say, a big challenge ahead of us to speed up developments. And if you allow me one more minute, I wanted to speak about wind developments in specific. Wind is a little bit more complex to develop than solar due to the level of studies that are needed, especially when it comes to the wind resource assessment, that to have a bankable resource assessment. Usually lenders would insist on having 1 full year of studies. Not any, I mean, you can install PV panels in a small piece of land and they are scalable, but to get to wind efficiencies, usually it's larger size projects, so you need to have proper land allocated that is ready with the proper evacuation lines, the proper infrastructure, access roads, because we deal also with very heavy and large components. When you have a turbine that is 150 meter high and the blade length is 50 meters or 60 meters, of course, you need proper transport means, and whether in ports, whether in the roads itself, to be able to handle this. So it requires a lot of, let's say, preparations and a lot of things to be done properly and with early planning. So to speed up wind development, you need to have all the ingredients in place: proper land, proper evacuation networks, and the land especially becomes sometimes, I mean, we deal with projects in other countries or in Africa, and usually we get stuck when we don't have proper land allocated, whether it's due to it's privately owned or it has some encroaching developments that are not, let's say, suitable to have the wind turbines installed close to them. And again, the problem with wind is that you cannot just install wind turbines anywhere. PV, you can install it even on rooftop, but wind, you look first for an area where it have a good wind potential. So, I mean, to have proper tariffs or competitive tariffs, you need to have good wind resources. So it's usually you look for the wind and then you try to find a suitable location, and that's all not always, let's say, easy. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Khaled.
Thank you.
In just less than a minute, if you can explain to us, Ahmed Zahran, the challenge of technology. You've in previous talks that I've attended to, you've alluded to the technology challenge when it comes to solar panel and how it can be domestically manufactured in Egypt. So can you elaborate on that, please?
So basically, the problem with solar globally is that the technology is not settled yet. So you have a lot of technological development that is happening at the moment. And that means that for any company to be able to be competitive, for example, in the production of solar panels, you have to have enough R&D investment and R&D abilities to enable you to cope with the change in technology or the change in efficiency that happens every 6 months. Looking at that setup and at that requirement, it would be very difficult to imagine that Egypt would be able to be competitive in the field of manufacturing of solar panels, because basically, if you're going to really want to be competitive on a global level, you have to make sure that you have the supporting industries, the ecosystem, and the R&D that would enable you to keep on the development of the technology of PVs, which we do not have at the moment. Is that something that we should have? I think yes, on the long run, but I think we have a long way to go with the development of that ecosystem or supporting services that are needed for that to happen. But there are many other things that are still needed that could help us in localizing the knowledge of solar stations or renewable energy in general, including many work that can be done on the energy management, on the distribution management, and so on that is related to renewable energy.
Thank you. Thank you so
Just
much. I would like
one
to take this moment now to actually call on Fatoumata to please just add 1 or 2 words. Apologies, we can't take more questions right now. Otherwise, we're really not going to make it in time. So apologies for that. Fatimata, please.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor, and the panel from Egypt. Really, really great stuff, great insight. But I just wanted to put a voice over what Professor Atala talked about, the partnership with the American University of Cairo. It is so important that we understand that once we get most of these conversations going, we find out that the businesses that are on the continent that need to basically run and execute the last mile, if you will, they are challenged. And some of the challenges that we've identified are the reason why the courses at the business school have been created and offer up for us. So for those of us that are on the call that are providing solutions and trying to get investment into our businesses that requires building your skills and capacity within your companies. This is an awesome opportunity for you to be able to get those skills and be very competitive when you're going up for the fundings that are available, whether it's with DFIs, private sector, or otherwise. So please take a look at it. I just wanted to add that point very importantly. In addition to it, because the team has worked along with ReEnergy Africa, we also have access to these amazing stories and businesses that you've heard on the panel from Egypt. So whether you're talking about wind or you're talking about solar, off-grid, on-grid, we do have the actual solutions that are happening on the continent, and those opportunities are here to increase our capacity across the continent. So thank you guys again very, very much for joining us from Egypt and showing us that it is possible, and I'm so excited. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Fatimata.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to the panelists from Egypt, to the moderator. Thank you, Samer Atala, for moderating so beautifully. And thank you for all your insights. And we'll be definitely hoping to receive questions in the Q&A box that could be answered also online.